You know what they say, there's no replacement for displacement. And today on HorsePower, we're going to build up a monster 588 big block for some of our neighbors here on the Power Block. Now, I'm talking about Ian and Jesse down at Xtreme 4x4 who recently started transforming an old GMC pickup into a down and dirty mud racer. It's a little like drag racing, a little bit like road racing, and a whole lot like, well, insanity. But if heads up, one-on-one dashes through mud, muck, and even water spins your gears, this could be your kind of competition. Mud racers experience a whole new concept of blinding speed, and they don't mind tearing up a whole lot of parts in hopes of a little taste of victory. All it takes is plenty of nerve, a good bit of skill, and lots of horsepower. Well, a few weeks ago, our friends down at Xtreme 4x4 got the extremely wild idea to turn this 87 GMC pickup truck into a mud racer. First stripping it down to bare frame, then building a drag race version of a roll cage, and jerking out the 14-bolt rear end to make way for a 9-bolt. Now, these guys must spend half of their lives in junkyards. That's where they found this well-used $25 Turbo 350 for a tranny. But here's the most outrageous part of this project. They actually want us horsepower guys to give this 400-cube piece of crap enough power to compete. We decided to start from scratch, and we'll send them the bill later.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
If they're going to get that truck down the mud pit and be competitive, then they need a real high horsepower, bulletproof big block. And we've got the right parts combination to get that job done.
Yeah, it all starts with this tall deck Merlin 3 block from World Products. It's made from high density cast iron, and ours came with their splayed billet main caps. It's got expanded water jackets for better cooling, priority main oiling system, and OEM mounting locations for the water pump, fuel pump, and for the motor mounts. Plus, for improved cylinder head sealing, it's got extra head bolt bosses here in the valley.
We're using Calico CT1 coated bearings for the mains and the rods. Now, they use a dry film lubricant that extends bearing life, frees up horsepower, and reduces oil temperature. Before we install them, though, we have to check for the proper clearance, which Buddy will show you how to do.
First, with the bearings installed in the main cap and main saddle, I torque the cap down to 110 foot-pounds. Then, using a micrometer, measure the diameter of the crank journals. Then I use a bore gauge to compare that dimension to the main bearing.
All right, what do we get?
We got 2,000ths. What we're looking for is 2 to 3,000ths. If you have less than 2,000ths, you're going to have a bearing failure. If you have more than 3, you're going to have low oil pressure problem.
Hey, buddy, I know you've had situations of not enough clearance with these blocks. What'd you do?
Well, basically, you want to take it to your machine shop and have them polish in the clearances that you're missing.
Now, with the bearings installed in the saddles, we're going to coat them with some Royal Purple Max-Tuff assembly lube. Then we install the upper part of our 2-piece rear main seal from Fel-Pro before we drop in our new crankshaft. This has got to be one of the best looking cranks we've ever used in here, and that's due to Eagle Specialty Products' new ESP armor finishing process that's ultra smooth so it sheds oil and reduces friction on the bearings. Now, ours is an internally balanced 4340 forged steel piece with a 4.5-inch stroke. Next, we lay down a bead of silicone across the entire surface of the rear main to prevent oil leaks. Then we can slip in the bottom half of our seal. Now we can install the rest of our main caps. By the way, World highly recommends billet splayed caps anytime you're making 1,000 horsepower or more. Next, we can secure the caps with 1/2-inch ARP bolts and studs that come with the block.
Hey, here's an important heads up about the Calico bearings for our connecting rods. Some kits, like ours, have different bearings for the upper and lower part of the rod. Even though they're marked, here's the best way you can tell they're installed correctly. The chamfered edge of the bearing will match up with the chamfered edge of the rod itself. Well, just like the main caps, these things also have to be clearanced. So we get started by torquing the rod bolts down to 60 foot-pounds. This time the measurement inside the big end was only about 1 3/4, which is too tight. So we use some of Calico's X bearings along with their standard bearings to get us into that 2 to 3,000ths range. So with that handled, the bill goes on with our 588 big block. We'll meet you right here after the break.
The build goes on in the HorsePower shop. Now it's a 588 cubic inch big block Chevy for our buddies down on Xtreme 4x4. So they'll have enough horsepower to push a big old GMC truck through a nasty mud drag pit.
Yeah, and to complete our rotating assembly, we're using a set of SRP aluminum pistons with a dome volume of 39 cc's. Now, add that to 114 cc's in our combustion chambers, and well, you got a compression ratio of 13.5 to 1. We're hanging them on a set of Eagles H-beam rods that have also been treated to that ESP armor finish. Now, after applying some lube, we can load the piston onto the rod using the wrist pin. There we go. Then, using our vise, we secure them with spiral locks. Now we can install this oil ring support rail. Why? Well, our 4.5-inch stroke moves the wrist pin up into the piston. This rail will close up this gap. We're going to finish up our pistons with some rings we got from Total Seal. First, on the bottom, 2 rings surrounding this oil scraper, and of course what it does is push oil through these holes to lubricate the pins and cool down the backs of the pistons. Next, a standard second ring, followed by a top ring, which is a 2-piece gapless compression ring from Total Seal. By the way, here's one all loaded up and ready to install. That is after applying oil to the rings, piston skirts, rod bearings, and cylinders. Then we bolt up the rod caps and torque them to specs.
Now that we have all the pistons installed, we're ready to install our camshaft for this monster big block. Now it's a billet steel Lunati piece that measures in at 8/16 on the intake, 7/85 on the exhaust, and that's with a 1.7 rocker arm ratio. Now it's also got a 114-degree center line with no built-in advance. Remember to lube the camshaft, which we did through the lifter valley. The timing set is a double roller quick adjust system from Cloy's. Up on top, the Lunati roller lifters can go in now, and half of them have an offset for the push rods to align them for the guide plates and rocker arms.
When it came to choosing heads for that big block mud monster, we decided to go with the only ones touted to handle 950 horsepower right out of the box. Now, these are Edelbrock Musi Victor series 24-degree CNC ported heads for big block Chevys. Oh, and speaking of ports, the intakes measure 367, exhaust 377, and over here, the valves spec out at 230 intake, 190 exhaust with a combustion chamber that measures 114 cc's. They're resting on a set of Felpro gaskets. Then, to keep them in place, we're using an ARP stud kit for Victor heads. And we torque the 12-point nuts to 80 foot-pounds. We're going to show you how to degree in the cam before we install the rest of the valve train. Ours, by the way, has a 114-degree center line, you may recall. Now, to do this, we installed rockers and push rods on top of the number 1 cylinder only, and for tools, a dial indicator, which comes into play later. Pointer here that's bolted to the block, and of course the degree wheel installed on the crank snout. Oh, one other little tool. This is a piston stop that installs right here where the spark plug goes.
First, to find top dead center, rotate the crank clockwise 10 degrees. Tighten the piston stop until it touches the top of the piston. Then rotate the crank clockwise until it hits the piston stop again. Mark the number, divide by 2, and that's top dead center. Okay, once you've established your TDC, we're going to rotate the crankshaft to full lift on the valve. Once you get the full lift, set your gauge up to 0, advance it 50 thousandths, take your reading on your degree wheel, back it up 50 thousandths, and go another 50 thousandths. Get your degree wheel number, add the 2, then divide by 2, and that's your intake center line.
If we hadn't have been right on the money, we could have used this little tool to advance or retard the timing set up to 6 degrees either way. We're using a Jessel Competition Series rocker kit that includes rocker stands we leave loosely bolted together. Using thread sealant, we tighten the intake stand first. Then we can tighten the Allen head joining bolt. With the exhaust stand tightened, we can drop in our Lunati push rods. Next, with the cam on its base circle for each cylinder, we install the rockers, torque them down, and adjust the valve lash. We're only a few parts away from finishing up this big block Chevy and hearing it roar on the engine dyno. So the best is definitely yet to come. You're finished, aren't you?
Yep, we're all done.
All right, time to finish up our big block Chevy here. Our part of a mud racer truck project kicked off by our friends at Xtreme 4x4. It all started with a Merlin 3 block from World Products. We dropped in a 4340 forged crank from Eagle Specialties. We used some of their HB rods with a set of SRP aluminum pistons. For a camshaft, we opted for a Lenati billet roller, and for a timing set, an adjustable Chloe's double roller. The lifters are Lenati's solid rollers, and we're using Edelbrock Musi Victor series heads, plus a Jessel Competition Series rocker kit. This motor's no doubt going to face a lot of abuse in the mud pits, so we're not cutting any corners, including the oiling system. This is a Steph oil pickup and pump, along with one of their aluminum oil pans made especially for the Merlin big block. As you can see, it's got an internal Teflon coated windage tray and a crank scraper.
Here's how you determine if you've got the right clearance between the pickup and the bottom of the pan. Measure from the pan rail on the block to the pickup, which is 7 5/8. Then measure the pan top to bottom, which here is 7 7/8. Then, considering the height of the pan and the thickness of the gasket, we've got right at 3/8 of an inch of clearance, which is adequate for proper oil supply. With the exterior bolts tightened down on the pan, just for the dyno, we're using this filter adapter from Mr. Gasket. Since our pan is so wide to clear our stroker crank, we're using nuts that attach to studs inside to secure it. Now make sure you use tape on your socket and silicone on your nuts so they don't drop off inside. Now to access it, we're using little external plugs. Then with the motor turned over, we can install this Moroso billet electric high volume water pump, which bolts up with a couple of 1 1/4 inch spacers to clear the front cover.
Well, for an intake, this ought to do the job. It's an Edelbrock Super Victor single plane for competition only. That's designed for tall deck big block Chevys with a 1 inch spacer machined in, and it'll accept a standard length distributor. Well, next, the valve covers, and like the block, they're from World Products. They're cast aluminum with an extra tall design to clear any valve train combination.
The carb from Quick Fuel Technologies is a 4500 HP that flows 1250 CFM. Now it's designed for drag racing and to run on gasoline. It's got billet metering blocks and 96 jets for the primary and secondary. Plus it's got polished aluminum die-cast fuel bowls.
Well, I gotta tell you, we're as eager as anybody to see what this thing does on our engine dyno. However, before we can do that, we gotta break it in and do some serious tuning. We'll be ready next week though, and I hope you are too.
Yeah, our big Merlin's gonna make a lot of power on the dyno.
No doubt. Well, there's more of this show to go though, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Man, look at that big thing. Beautiful. Hey, welcome back to the HorsePower Shop. You know, there was a time when building a motor usually meant sorting through a bunch of different speed part brands to find the right heads, intake, cam, and so forth. And while engine building will always involve experimentation, the trend now is to use systems where all the parts are designed to work together. Well, recently we had access to a place in mid-America where that kind of work is all they do. Everybody wants performance and that in-your-face power. But the trick is building speed parts everybody can afford. Well, enter the guys from Trick Flow Specialties. A team of engineers, designers, pattern makers, machinists, and engine specialists, all serious about building cylinder heads that match top-end kits for street and strip Fords and Chevys.
The Trick Flow staff is an incredibly dedicated group of people. The vast majority of the guys here have hot rods. They really like what we do. They're really into the sport.
General Manager Al Noe oversees manufacturing, where his team employs an army of 5-axis CNC machines that carve raw castings into performance intakes and the company's famous twisted wedge cylinder heads for small block Ford engines. A combination good enough for 2 NMRA World Championships and the top speed record in real street. Building winning parts starts at CAD stations, where engineers use 3D solid modeling to develop prototypes and patterns using materials from high-tech composites to zebra wood.
We have about 150 man-hours in designing the casting for the cylinder head. After the design process of the casting, it goes through a rapid prototyping process. So basically everything is figured out before we make the first casting.
Related parts also undergo virtual testing here to simulate operating stress. After port prototypes are developed, they're tested on the flow bench. The optimized shape is digitized, creating a tool path so that every port is identical. It takes about 10 hours to machine a set of heads. The Gen X LS1 kits also include a camshaft, rocker arms, gaskets, and hardware.
We're looking at an engine as a whole and seeing what we can do to give our customers a complete package to make as much power as possible.
To do that, packages are dynoed against OEM parts and competitors for power and durability. TrickFlow made over 4,000 dyno pulls to develop the LS packages, so they knew what was needed. The stock LS GM head is a good design, but this quench pad by the plug is a weak spot TrickFlow corrected.
We relocated the spark plug, and another dramatic design change that we did is we relocated the center line of both the intake and the exhaust valve by 1.5 degrees. That unshrouded the valve back away from the valve seat area, which resulted in much better flow.
Port volume on the Cathedral intakes is 215 cc's on the Gen X LS1 heads, 80 cc's on the exhaust ports. After installing bronze valve guides, techs use SERDI machines to cut 3-angle valve jobs into the seats. During production, a CNC laser constantly vectors for dimensional accuracy within 10,000ths of an inch. Then heads go to the clean room, where they're assembled with dual valve springs, stainless valves, and titanium retainers with 7-degree locks and Viton seals. In the end, the new LS top end kit will get the final test, the one the consumer gives it.
All right, ready to go for a ride?
Let's go.
Let's test it out.
You know you want an extremely stout rear end housing for your 9-inch Ford. Well, how about this XT1 Extreme Duty housing that comes from Highland Daytona Racing? Now, this thing is made from Swiss Duramax steel, which is stronger than chrome moly, but not as brittle. It uses 31 spline axles from Strange Engineering that are made from induction hardened steel. Now, you can get your housing bare like this, or fully loaded with axles, seals, perches, bearings, the works, for just over $2,600.
Are you looking for a set of cylinder heads for your big block Chevy? Well, Summit Racing now offers fully assembled iron heads like this, so you don't have to have yours rebuilt. They come with a 308cc intake runner, 129cc exhaust runner, with a heart-shaped combustion chamber that measures in at 119cc. Now they're ready to run right out of the box, so you don't have to run to your machine shop. Just go fetch your Summit Racing catalog, where you'll pay less than $650 per side. Well, that's it for today. We'll see you next time on Horsepower.